Beth is a really great friend of ours, and I love this. She is a curator of the feminine story, an amplifier of the feminine voice, and explorer of feminine glory. And I just really respect Beth. She's a businesswoman, a missions leader. She's doing all sorts of great stuff. Some of the resources that she's created are Fierce and Lovely, which is a podcast. She has also created the Fierce and Lovely Moms membership community and curates that and leads that. And then she's written a book called A Voice Becoming, a year-long mother-daughter journey into passionate, purposed living. And so many angles. She's also involved in an amazing organization that responds to sex trafficking around the country and here in Colorado. And so just a really talented woman of God, has so much to say, and I'm so excited to introduce you to her today. So with that said, we're going to have Beth speak after I pray. Jesus, as we think about your story, your great story for the world, and think about our stories and how each one of our unique stories connects with that great story, the history of the world and the future and our present. We ask that we would learn how to better understand how stories matter, and especially the stories of our kids and our stories as their parents. And so thank you for bringing Beth to us today to encourage us and how to think about that more deeply, how to incorporate that into our parenting journey. And we just are grateful to be in this story that you're writing in this very moment. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, let me tell you just a little bit more about myself. I am up in northern Colorado, which is currently on fire. So pray for our state, please. And I am married to a wonderful partner and collaborator. It's been 25 years, and we have 3 kids, one of whom is a junior in college, and the other 2 are still in high school at home with us. And Chris and I co-lead, we own and run a counseling center and restoration counseling, and we are all about story. And I direct what we call our digital laboratories, which is really the space to come alive through webinars, podcasts, courses, and membership communities. And that's called Restory Labs. And so in addition to Fierce and Lovely Moms membership community and the podcast that my girls and I do, I'm doing all of that around counseling as well. And I say that, I think it's important because at the heart of all of that is a heart to better understand our story. We really believe that to the degree that we come to understand our story, that's the degree to which we will experience connected relationships, the relationships with our kids and our spouses and our community that we most long to have. And so I am deeply committed to story, and that's what I'm going to share with you this afternoon. I want to start by talking about the issues that we so often as parents come to with our kids, with our teens, where we kind of focus on whatever it is at hand, right? That is the immediate felt need, the pain point that we come into conversations with them over, whether it's sex or drugs and substances, social media usage, smartphones, friendships, you name it, right? We can call all of those issues. And we enter into those issues with our kids, and we tend to focus on the issue and our kids' behavior or lack thereof around the issue. And so often as parents, we lose sight of the actual 2 most important things in those interactions around the issue. The first is understanding and seeing more of our child's glory in the way that they interact with that issue. And my husband talked about that on the Parenting Pivot last Monday, all about finding our child's glory. And we can do that when we have eyes to see that the way they're interacting around the issue with us points to their glory. It shows us more of their core motivation, who they were made to be, even in the way that they engage the issue. The second thing that we often miss when we hyper-focus on the issue and their behavior is our own story. and how our story of when we were their age or perhaps another age in our childhood is present. It is there in the room with our kids while we're having that conversation. And we often miss that. We're not aware of that. And therefore, we can't process through that and come to parent them better because we're hyper focused on the issue. And so today I want to talk about why understanding your story as a mom or a dad is so important to achieve that connected relationship with your teen that you want so badly. So start with this. I want you to picture the issue with your teen that is a reoccurring point of tension, conflict, or all out argument. Okay, just bring that to mind. What is that issue for the two of you? Now, as you consider that particular issue, I want you to think about how you typically come at it. Do you focus on kind of the topic at hand and then your child's like missteps or failures around it? Let me give you an example. This is a rather a benign one, and it's a little bit old, but a couple years ago with me and my 12-year-old daughter, the issue was food. Food. She was gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, all the things free, and she needed a lot of really specific food. And I tried hard to get those. I tried hard to be creative, but I felt like I was always failing because she was constantly complaining, asking for more, asking for different food. And so every time food came up, I bristled. My heart began to race. I began to get defensive. And often I was just mad. I was always focused on she is ungrateful. She's not thoughtful. She's not telling me what I need to buy before I actually go to the store. Or she's entitled. She thinks that she deserves all of these expensive gluten-free brands, right? I was focused on how she could improve to make me feel better about the issue. My focus was very much on her and the issue. And so I could have begun to talk through that with her and talked a little bit about, hey, if you were a little bit more thoughtful and wrote that down before I went to the store, it would go better for us, right? And maybe her behavior would begin to change a little bit. Maybe our interaction around that conflict would begin to shift and improve. But I wonder if my reaction would ever change because I was very unaware that there was another story present in the kitchen every time she and I had that conflict. That every time my heart began to race and I began to bristle and get defensive, there was another story in the room. And it was a story of when I was her age, and it goes way back, but I was completely unaware of it. And that's a small example. And I say it to show you that our story can poke up in all sorts of ways, big or small. And so I want to talk about that with you this afternoon. But let's start by talking about what I mean when I say story, because story is a very popular word these days. And I don't think it's always meant in the same way that I mean it. And we talk about it here at Restoration Counseling. So I'm going to share my screen and just dive in to why story matters and why it's so important. Well, all of us grow up having various events that happen in our lives, right? These are the different situations, the circumstances, the experiences, and the atmospheres that we navigated as children. All right, this is my grandfather died when I was a junior. My parents got divorced when I was 12. My grandmother got sick when I was in eighth grade, right? Like different situations and circumstances. And you and your siblings all pretty much experienced the same events. These were just the data points, we call them, or the points on a timeline throughout your life. Many times when we talk about story, this is what people think we're talking about. Tell us about the events of your life. Well, my grandfather got sick and he started to decline and he ended up dying my junior year in high school, and that was really difficult. And we kind of talk about the bullet points of the event, and that's the story. That's the story of my grandfather's death. And we do that with all sorts of different stories. And we treat them like they're just these data points. They're really just the events that happen to us. And so we don't want to just stop there in our understanding of story. Because as a response to those events, you as an individual, you uniquely as a woman, as a man in that family, um, a child then, you had certain emotional responses to those situations and circumstances. How you experienced those, and then how you were attended to by your parents are very different. This is where we start to diverge, even within families, because your sister or brother might have had the same events occur in their lives, but the way they experienced that event and the emotions they had as a result might be very different than yours. I have a sister and a brother. They're both younger, and they don't remember entire periods of time of our childhood, periods of time that I have vivid memories of that were very difficult. They have none. Perhaps you have a sibling who thought everything was wonderful and perfect. Meanwhile, you're experiencing something radically different. And so uniquely, we have these emotional responses to an event. And even that is not enough to cover the breadth of what I mean by story, because it's when we make an interpretation as a child based on that emotional response, that is when we begin to formulate what we believe to be true about ourselves and God, other relationships, in the world. These are our conclusions and really our survival mechanisms as children. Right? Think of the verse 1 Corinthians 13:11 that says, when we were a child, we thought and acted like a child, but when we became older, we left those childlike ways behind. When we are children, we are able to do and think what we can as a child. And I really believe that God gives us this ability to make interpretations and come to conclusions to protect ourselves, to weather difficult seasons. And so survival mechanisms aren't always negative, but they're not always healthy and the best to bring into our adulthood. But it is these interpretations that make up our story. And this is what is present in a kitchen when you're arguing with your teenage daughter about food. So let me describe to you what I mean by all of that. In the Fierce and Lovely Moms membership community, we talk about the mom story journey. And for this purpose today, for access, I've adapted it to include you dads. But I have just created what I see to be 5 different stages of us becoming more and more and more aware and processed of where those interpretations are playing themselves out in our daily lives. And it's a swirly, dynamic graph, because I don't believe we ever arrive. It's not linear. We don't land at stage 5 on one particular story and just rest there for life. In fact, I believe that on a Monday, I can be in stage 5 with one particular story, and on a Tuesday, I'm right back in stage 1 with another. And so that's why it's swirly like this. But I want to go through it really quickly and just a surface level of really what we cover in our community. But this is so important. Stage 1 is protected. It's where I enter into my daughter talking and needing more food, and I am very guarded. My focus on parenting is her and where she is not getting it right, because there's nothing going on here. It's not about me. This is about her or the issue at hand. And so progress in stage 1 is really beginning to learn that it might not always be about them. Maybe there's more going on here, and beginning to just wonder a little bit about that, right? And so it's learning that your story is present in parenting, and that those difficult interactions are not always just about the issue or your child. And so that is protected. Stage 2 is really when we begin to be more curious, more aware, where I can begin to wonder, okay, that's unusual that I would respond so defensively about something relatively small, that my heart would begin to race, that I would begin to feel panicky and defensive over something like that. And so I began to wonder, what is going on in my body? Why am I reacting this way every time we talk about food? And so I'm recognizing, I think there's more here. And I think it has to do with something in me and about my story that's being triggered here in this kitchen. And if I will continue with that, then I can allow my own parenting of my daughter to actually lead me on a path to growth. And that leads us into stage 3. Now, this is the most disruptive stage. This is the one where many of us begin to see counselors as we seek out a guide to help walk us back into some of those early stories of when we were her age, of when we were his age. This is where we might really need some assistance to help us see those narratives differently, to help us name where we experience some emotion to an event and then made some interpretations that we're living out of today. This is the hinge stage. And if you linger here, you are going to see some incredible growth personally and in your relationship with your kids. This is when I began to seek out counseling to help me name what is going on with the food. And it wasn't just that, right? At this point, lots of things had begun to be poked by having a teenage daughter. And wouldn't you know that so much of my pain, the parts of my story that have shaped me the most today, hurt me the most when I was her age. And when she reached that age, I just was poked daily. And so I needed a navigator to help me through that. And I began to really name some of those interpretations that I made at her age when things were very difficult at home, when it was very financially stressful and tenuous, when I began to come to some conclusions that I needed to hold it together. And I needed to hold my family together. And I needed to be in control because that was my coping mechanism. That was my survival strategy. And I believe it was God's gift to me to have control in a season of life that was very out of control. And so as I began to process that more, I began to name that when my daughter is coming to me, what I'm hearing is, you're not in control. You don't know what I need. You haven't gotten what I need. You're not providing for what I need. You're losing control here. That's what I heard because it was my younger girl self that was in that kitchen. She was the one who was triggered and then was responding, right? In that, out of that interpretation and that survival strategy, which again, it got me through childhood, but it's not how I want to live as an adult. I know God has more for me. And so it takes going through this stage and really processing, wrestling for the meaning of where your triggers are and learning how to parent in a way that you realize, okay, how I'm parenting my own teen right now today is connected to who I was as a young teen. And this can be a really long stage, but so beautiful. And when we can walk through it, we get to stage 4, which is empathetic. This is where you can begin to parent, really you're parenting your own childhood self, where I could begin to say to younger Beth, I'm going to let you off the hook. You don't have to be in control anymore. I've got it. I've got us. But also, I can bless her. You did so well back then. Look at what you were able to do for your family because of that control. But I can also grieve. I can grieve for her and be sad that she had to do that at all. And as I began to offer empathy to that girl, wouldn't she know, I have a lot more empathy to give to my teenage daughter right in front of me. Empathy breeds empathy. And so in stage 4, we can begin to rewrite our story as each new issue arises, kind of reparenting ourselves as we parent our teens. This is fragile. This stage is fragile and tender. And depending on the age of our kids, we get to invite them in more and more to see this stage because we're starting to give them a new perspective of how to actually handle themselves and us as their parents. We get to teach and model for them empathy as we begin to give it to ourselves. We get to rewrite the way that we interact over all the issues that previously were just reoccurring conflict and tension. It can be such a beautiful stage. And ultimately, it leads to the last stage, vulnerable. And this is where, in age appropriate ways, we can invite our kids into our story. And so after going through stage 3 processing with the counselor and beginning to just have so much more language for what was going on in my heart in those kitchen moments, I decided it was time to invite my daughter into that. And I sat down with her one day right after one of those, again, another one of those moments. Hopefully I responded better that time, but I decided it's time to tell her what's going on for me. And I told her my story, and I told her what was true back then and what interpretations I came to and how I began to just live out of this belief that I had to hold it all together and be in control, and how her innocent question for different and more food triggered that response. And so I invited her in. I was fluent in my own story. I was able to really communicate that to her. And again, my hope is that I am helping her see story differently, and I will shrink her story journey. Maybe it won't take her as long as it has taken me in my life. And so that is stage 5, vulnerable. And that's really where we want to spend most of our time as parents, is in this vulnerable place where we're tender, we're human. We don't have all the answers all the time. We're still growing. We're still becoming more of who God designed us to be. And I believe that when we can model that for our kids, and we're focusing more on that, on God's glory and God's glory in us to the world, and we're not focused as much on those pain points, those issues and topics that are constantly coming up in our home, well, then we're able to give them a vision for life that is worthy of them following, worthy of them pursuing something more than just the immediate satisfaction of the day. And so I want to invite you all to go find out where you are in your own story journey. I have just a quick 10-question assessment that you can take. Again, dads, it's designed for moms because that's the space that I've created, but it'll pop out kind of a conclusion of where you might be in those 5 different stages and give you a little bit more information on that for you to just begin to wonder, where am I? And maybe not where are you with all the things, but where are you on that one issue, conflict that keeps coming up over and over again? And might I encourage you today, if there's a challenge I can leave with you, it's to really tune in to your body. And the next time you start racing or bristling or being defensive in ways that are not characteristic for you, pause. That's where you need to be curious. That's where you're being invited to explore. And I hope you'll do that. I hope you'll begin to follow the trail and linger and see where it takes you. Because that, I believe, is the path to a more connected relationship with your kids that you want so badly. Thanks so much for being with me today and hearing all of that. Hey, Maya.
Hey, thank you, Beth. That was awesome. And there's a lot there. So I'm excited to get into the Q&A here. I mean, so here's what I wrote down. This is not something I don't think you said this, but when your kids hit the age of your own wounding, that's when things get really tricky as a parent. And I think that what you've helped us to see today is the awareness that is something that we need to be paying attention to as parents, and understanding that how our story definitely seeps into how we interpret our kids. And so you talked about story being the combination of events, emotions, and then your interpretation of those events and emotions. And then obviously your 5 steps are protected, curious, processing. And I wrote down that processing is when you start being guided by some external help. Empathetic, that's when you're parenting your girl or boy self. And then vulnerable, which is where that's when you become superhuman and you're ready to
Right.
your kid, right? So anyway, thank you so much for that context.